It all started with a shout, a sharp, piercing yell that echoed through the serene streets of California, cutting across the quiet luxury of manicured gardens, sparkling pools, and hushed neighborhoods where no one expected scandal to erupt. But there it was, Meghan Markle, standing in her California home, her voice trembling with anger, frustration, and something deeper, something that seemed almost uncontainable. Imagine, for a moment, the woman who once charmed the world with a smile and grace, now shouting in a way that sent shockwaves far beyond the Pacific coast. And the reason? A warning, delivered not gently, not privately, but with all the weight of someone who feared the truth was far worse than anyone could imagine. That warning came from none other than Cory Vitiello, a man who had stepped into Meghan and Harry's world, someone whose words would ignite a chain reaction that no one, not even Prince Harry, was prepared for. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why would Meghan Markle, the Duchess who had once captured the imagination of millions, be reduced to this? Why the yelling, the confrontation, the palpable tension that hung in the air like an electric storm before a lightning strike? Here's the truth. There's a picture. One picture that has sparked endless rumors, online speculation, and heated debates behind closed doors. A picture that, some claim, proves a side of Meghan Markle few have ever seen, a side that strays far from royal protocol and public perception. And it's tied to California, to private meetings, to late-night whispers, and to allegations so scandalous they threaten to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the former Duchess. This is not just another tabloid rumor. This is a story that reaches into the heart of Meghan Markle's life, her relationships, her choices, and the very public fallout that followed her every move. It's a story that intertwines personal secrets with public exposure, and it's happening now, in real time, before the world's eyes. And it begins with that yell, that confrontation, that moment when Cory Vitiello felt compelled to warn Prince Harry about something no one was prepared to see. Let's rewind for context. After stepping away from royal duties, Meghan and Harry sought refuge in California, trading palace walls for a sprawling lifestyle in the Golden State. They were free, they were untethered, and for a time, the world watched with fascination as they navigated this new chapter. But freedom, as we often see, comes at a cost. Distance from the royal spotlight didn't shield them from scrutiny. In fact, it magnified every whisper, every leak, every rumor. And it was in this environment of wealth, celebrity, and private indulgence that Cory Vitiello entered the picture, bringing with him a warning that would shake Harry to his core. What was the warning? What did Cory see that forced him to step into this private sphere and confront a prince? According to insiders, the message was clear, urgent, and terrifying. Something about Meghan, something about private associations, and something that could not remain hidden without consequences. But Prince Harry, caught between loyalty, love, and doubt, was left to navigate a treacherous path, unsure of whom to trust. And this is where the drama intensifies. Because while Prince Harry was grappling with these warnings, another revelation was quietly making its way to the surface, a photograph. Not just any photograph, but one that allegedly captures Meghan in a compromising situation, taking off her bra in the company of a gentleman. It's the kind of image that sparks gossip, fuels headlines, and raises questions about a life lived between the public gaze and private indulgence. And the implications? They are vast. For some, it's proof of a side of Meghan Markle that contrasts sharply with her public persona, a side that critics quickly labeled sugar baby behavior. But is it really that simple? Or is it a distorted narrative, a moment plucked from context and amplified by those who thrive on scandal? Ask yourself, if a picture could upend everything you thought you knew about someone, how would you react? Would you confront them? Ignore it? Or would you, like Prince Harry, be caught in a storm of conflicting emotions, warnings, and potential betrayals? This story is not just about a photograph or a shout in California. It's about choices, consequences, and the fragile line between public perception and private reality. And the tension doesn't stop there. Because while the world speculates, while tabloids debate, and while social media explodes with opinions, the truth, or at least the fragments of it, is carefully guarded by those who witnessed it firsthand. Friends, insiders, and even distant acquaintances hold pieces of a puzzle that, when combined, paint a picture far more dramatic than any headline could convey. There are whispers of private dinners, secret encounters, and conversations that took place far from the camera's eye, conversations that shaped decisions and shaped reactions. It's easy to forget, amid all the gossip and conjecture, that these are real people with real emotions. Meghan's anger in California was not merely a performance. It was a reflection of pressure, frustration, and perhaps fear. And Prince Harry's position? Impossible. Warned by a trusted figure, caught between love and loyalty, and facing revelations that could not be ignored, he had to decide how to act, how to respond, and how to protect those he cared about, while the world was watching, judging, and speculating at every turn. So why does this story matter now? Because it's a moment frozen in time that speaks to broader truths about celebrity, royalty, and human relationships. It's a window into the fragility of trust, the volatility of fame, and the intensity of private moments made public. It's about the choices we make when confronted with scandal, the alliances we form when secrets are revealed, and the consequences that ripple outward in ways we can't always predict. And this is just the beginning. Because while the shout in California grabbed attention, and while the picture fueled speculation, the chain of events that followed would reach far beyond the Pacific coast. There were confrontations, accusations, media storms, and whispers that made their way back across the Atlantic to London. And at the center of it all, Meghan Markle, navigating a world of scrutiny and expectation, while secrets threatened to unravel a life meticulously curated for public consumption. By now, you're probably asking yourself, what happened after that confrontation? How did Prince Harry respond? Who else was involved? And perhaps most importantly, what does that photograph really reveal about Meghan Markle? The answers are tangled, explosive, and deeply human. And as we unravel them, piece by piece, you'll begin to see a story far more complex and far more shocking than anything the headlines have dared to suggest. But what came next in California would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The air was thick with tension. You could feel it just walking past the gates of the sprawling California estate, that sense that something had shifted, something unseen but impossible to ignore. Meghan Markle was not just upset. She was volatile, sharp, and unrelenting. It started as a low murmur, a muttered frustration. Then came the yelling, the kind of voice that carries through walls, through gardens, through the whispers of neighbors who had only ever seen the couple smile politely from behind tinted windows. What had set her off? And why did it matter so much that it drew Cory Vitiello into the storm? Imagine being in the room. The tension, the anticipation, the unspoken threat that anything said could ignite an emotional wildfire. Prince Harry, normally composed and calm, was on edge. His eyes flicked between Meghan and Cory, reading expressions, trying to gauge what had crossed the invisible line. And for anyone watching from the outside, the scene looked almost surreal. A duchess turned Californian, the prince caught off guard, and a friend or advisor trying to deliver a warning no one wanted to hear. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, but the spark had already been struck. According to multiple accounts, the confrontation began over what seemed like a minor disagreement, a miscommunication blown out of proportion. Meghan had received news, or at least believed she had, that suggested her personal life was under scrutiny in ways she could no longer control. Cory Vitiello, aware of the brewing storm, stepped in to warn Harry, to tell him something critical, something that could not remain hidden. Yet, the moment he spoke, Meghan's reaction was immediate, explosive. She accused, she shouted, she lashed out. The words were sharp, precise, and delivered with a force that made the air feel charged. Now, step back for a second. Picture this. Meghan Markle, a woman who has carefully navigated the public gaze, meticulously managing appearances and narrative, now stripped of composure in her own home. What does that reveal? How often do we see someone this calculated unravel in such a raw, human moment? And for Prince Harry, the implications were clear. A warning had become a confrontation, and a confrontation had become a crisis. But what exactly was the warning? What truth could Cory Vitiello have revealed that would provoke such a reaction? It all revolves around trust, secrecy, and exposure. Cory, from everything insiders suggest, had witnessed, or at least been made aware of, something in Meghan's life that contradicted the public image she had carefully constructed. Something private, something intimate, something explosive. And he felt it necessary to intervene, to pull Prince Harry aside, and to make him aware of a reality that could not be ignored. That's when the shouting escalated, the tension reached its peak, and the drama of the California showdown began in earnest. Think about it. How often do we, as outsiders, underestimate the weight of private knowledge? A picture, a message, a whispered warning can shift dynamics instantly. Cory's role, for all intents and purposes, was that of a messenger, a bearer of truths too delicate or too dangerous to be ignored. And yet, in delivering this information, he became part of the narrative itself. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant, caught in the emotional crossfire of a confrontation that was as public as it was personal. Meanwhile, Meghan's emotions were layered, complicated, and contradictory. Anger at perceived betrayal, frustration at public intrusion, and fear of exposure all combined in a volatile mix. How could Prince Harry respond? How could anyone? And yet, as she shouted, as her voice reverberated through the mansion, there was also an element of defiance, a statement that she would not be controlled, manipulated, or defined by anyone's perception. But at what cost? At what point does defiance cross into self-sabotage? What makes this showdown even more compelling is the interplay between public persona and private reality. Meghan Markle has always been an expert at crafting image, at presenting a polished exterior that aligns with personal goals. But California, with its freedom, isolation, and celebrity culture, exposed the cracks. Without the formalities of palace life, without the rigid structures and protocols that once dictated behavior, the raw, unfiltered emotions emerged. And it was in this environment that the shouting began, the warnings were delivered, and the fragile equilibrium between trust, loyalty, and exposure began to fracture. Let's not forget Prince Harry's perspective. He had been warned, but he had also been caught between loyalty to his wife and awareness of potential consequences. How do you act when someone you trust delivers a warning that challenges everything you thought you knew? And how do you navigate the fallout when that warning provokes a response that is unpredictable, uncontainable, and intensely personal? For Harry, the California showdown was not just a moment of observation. It was a crucible, a test of judgment, empathy, and patience under pressure. And as observers, we can only speculate about the private calculus behind every glance, every pause, every word spoken in that charged atmosphere. Then there's the external element, the rumors, the whispers, the photograph that supposedly started it all. A picture, allegedly showing Meghan in a compromising situation with a gentleman, reportedly taking off her bra. Whether this image is a definitive proof or a misinterpreted moment is still debated, but its existence, and the very notion of it, ignited the confrontation. The emotions tied to this photograph were immediate and intense: shame, fear, and anger. Imagine receiving such news in a private space, knowing that a friend felt compelled to warn your spouse. How do you reconcile that? How do you contain that? Clearly, Meghan's reaction suggests that containment was impossible. And yet, the complexity deepens. Was this confrontation purely about the photograph, or was it about something more profound? Trust, loyalty, and the fear of exposure? Did Cory Vitiello's warning act as a trigger, a spark that ignited latent anxieties, insecurities, and unresolved tensions? Or was it merely the surface manifestation of long-standing pressures amplified by media scrutiny, social expectations, and the shadow of royalty? Perhaps all of these factors collided in that single, explosive moment, creating a scenario that is as much about human emotion as it is about scandal. Consider also the strategic elements at play. Every word, every reaction, every pause had implications, not just personally, but publicly. Even in the seclusion of California, Meghan and Harry were aware that the outside world was never far away. Social media, paparazzi, and rumor mills ensured that privacy was a fleeting illusion. The California showdown, then, was not just a private argument. It was an event with ripple effects, one that would set the stage for media narratives, social media debates, and endless speculation. And it all started with shouting, tension, and a warning that was too significant to ignore. For the audience, the stakes are clear. This is more than a confrontation. It is a window into a world few understand, where personal relationships intersect with fame, secrecy, and public expectation. It's a scenario in which a single moment, a shout, a warning, a glance, can shift dynamics, alter loyalties, and reshape narratives. And while we may never know every private detail, the story itself offers insight into how even the most polished, composed figures can unravel when faced with conflicting pressures, hidden truths, and human emotion that refuses to be controlled. But what happened after the shouting subsided? How did Prince Harry respond when faced with this storm of emotion and revelation? And what did Meghan do next, knowing that a private warning had sparked such an explosive confrontation? The answers lie in the chain of events that followed, a sequence of private conversations, decisions made behind closed doors, and actions that would escalate the situation far beyond California. And just as you think you understand the scope of this showdown, a new layer emerges, a twist that neither the prince, the Duchess, nor Cory Vitiello could have anticipated, one that would make the next move in this drama both inevitable and shocking. What exactly did Cory Vitiello see that made him step into this high-stakes, emotionally charged situation? That is the question no one could ignore. Imagine being a friend, an advisor, someone outside the immediate royal bubble, suddenly confronted with knowledge that could destabilize not just a private life, but a public image meticulously crafted over years. Cory knew the consequences of inaction. He knew the stakes were high, and he knew that Prince Harry, despite his experience with scrutiny and scandal, might not be prepared for what was coming. The warning, insiders suggest, was not casual. It was urgent, precise, and layered with implications that reached far beyond a single photograph or a moment of personal indiscretion. Cory had allegedly observed interactions, received messages, and connected that suggested Meghan's behavior, her private associations, her choices, her clandestine moments, was far more complicated than the public narrative suggested. And he made the decision to intervene. But why would Cory risk his own reputation, his own relationships, to deliver a warning that could create chaos? Because he believed that Harry needed to know that ignoring the signs could result in consequences neither of them could easily repair. Now consider Harry's position. He had been warned, but warnings in such contexts are never simple. They are loaded with emotion, ambiguity, and potential misinterpretation. How do you act when someone tells you something that challenges your understanding of someone you love? How do you balance loyalty with the need for clarity, trust with the risk of betrayal? And how do you respond when the warning itself becomes the catalyst for a confrontation that spirals out of control? These were questions Harry had to navigate in the hours, days, and weeks that followed Cory's intervention. The warning reportedly began with subtle hints, the kind of cautious phrases one uses when treading on delicate ground. "You need to know what's happening," Cory allegedly said. "I've seen things you need to be aware of. This isn't just rumor or gossip." That initial approach is critical to understanding the dynamic at play. Cory wasn't trying to provoke conflict. He was trying to illuminate reality. But reality, as it turns out, has a way of provoking conflict all on its own. And what did Harry see? He saw his wife, the woman he had trusted implicitly, react with a mixture of shock, anger, and defensiveness. He saw Meghan's carefully controlled persona crack, revealing vulnerabilities, insecurities, and a raw intensity that few had ever witnessed. And he heard the voice of a trusted friend delivering a message that demanded attention, no matter how uncomfortable. In that moment, the tension was palpable. Every glance, every pause, every word carried weight. The room was charged not just with emotion, but with the potential for decisions that could ripple far beyond California. Let's pause and consider the human element here. Being warned about someone you love is never easy. It forces reflection, doubt, and evaluation of what you thought was true. For Prince Harry, the stakes were magnified by the public eye, the media scrutiny, and the legacy of his family. How do you reconcile private loyalty with public responsibility? How do you interpret warnings that suggest behavior contrary to everything you have been taught to believe about trust and love? And how do you act without escalating the situation into something irreparable? The layers of this scenario are complex. Cory's warning wasn't simply about a photograph or a social faux pas. It was about patterns, context, and the potential for secrets to surface in ways that could impact relationships, reputations, and even public perception. And as insiders have suggested, the warning carried subtext, a sense of urgency, an implication that the consequences of ignoring the signs could be catastrophic. It wasn't a casual conversation. It was a moment of truth, a crossroads in which decisions made, or not made, could define the trajectory of relationships and reputations alike. Then there is the question of timing. Why California? Why this particular moment? Some suggest that distance from royal oversight created a unique environment, a bubble in which behavior could shift without immediate consequence. Others argue that proximity to social circles, media insiders, and celebrity networks created a different kind of pressure, one that intensified private decisions and amplified scrutiny. Whatever the reason, the warning arrived at a pivotal time, a moment when emotions were heightened, stakes were elevated, and the potential for explosive conflict was at its peak. The warning also revealed contradictions that Harry had to grapple with. On one hand, he had a deep-seated trust in Meghan, a belief in her intentions, and a commitment forged over years of partnership. On the other hand, he faced information that challenged that trust, information that suggested actions and associations far beyond public understanding. How do you reconcile love with doubt, trust with uncertainty? And how do you navigate the shadow of potential scandal without losing yourself or those you care about? These are not abstract questions. They were the questions Harry faced in real time, in the aftermath of Cory's revelation. The emotional stakes cannot be overstated. Harry, who has spent much of his life under intense scrutiny, was suddenly thrust into a private dilemma that carried all the weight of public consequence. He had to weigh the credibility of a friend, the reaction of a spouse, and the implications for his own reputation. And all the while, the world outside California remained unaware, watching from a distance, speculating, and waiting for the inevitable fallout. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the nature of the warning itself. Cory did not simply report facts. He conveyed urgency, concern, and an understanding of human behavior that added layers of pressure to the decision-making process. He implied that ignoring the warning could lead to irreversible outcomes, but delivering it in a way that would be accepted without defensiveness or anger was nearly impossible. And so the warning became not just a message, but a catalyst, triggering a confrontation, eliciting emotion, and setting the stage for the unfolding drama. And then there is Meghan's reaction. As Harry absorbed the warning, Meghan's own emotions boiled to the surface. Anger, defensiveness, and perhaps fear collided in a display that revealed just how tightly controlled her public persona had been, and how fragile it could become under stress. Her shouting, her gestures, her tone, all communicated a refusal to be dictated by anyone, even as the warning itself underscored the fragility of trust. For Harry, the moment demanded clarity, patience, and judgment under pressure. One misstep could escalate the situation into something irreversible. And yet, despite the tension, the confrontation was far from predictable. Cory's warning was only the beginning. The subsequent reactions, the private conversations, and the decisions made behind closed doors would define the next chapter in California, a chapter filled with scandal, emotion, and revelation. What secrets would emerge? What truths could be hidden no longer? And how would the individuals involved navigate the impossible balance between loyalty, love, and exposure? It's worth asking the audience. If you were in Harry's position, what would you do? Would you confront? Retreat? Investigate discreetly? And what about Meghan? How do you respond when confronted with a warning that implies betrayal, secrecy, and exposure? These questions are not hypothetical. They are the lived reality of those involved, and they illustrate why the California showdown was far more than shouting. It was a collision of loyalty, trust, and the human consequences of private knowledge made urgent. But just when it seemed that the warning had done its job, that the confrontation had peaked, another layer emerged, a revelation so unexpected, so dramatic, that it threatened to upend every assumption made by Harry, Meghan, and even Cory himself. A photograph, a private moment captured and circulating in ways no one anticipated. The warning was only the start, and the fallout from that single, explosive image would propel the drama into a realm that none of the participants could have foreseen. A single image. That's all it took. One photograph, allegedly showing Meghan Markle in a private moment with a gentleman, allegedly taking off her bra. One moment, frozen in time, that instantly transformed whispers into full-blown speculation, commentary, and judgment. The image surfaced quietly at first, circulating in private circles, screenshots shared between friends, insiders, and media contacts. But as with all explosive content involving a public figure, it spread rapidly, fueled by curiosity, outrage, and the inherent fascination people have with what's meant to remain hidden. Imagine the moment Prince Harry saw it. Imagine the knot of disbelief, concern, and betrayal that must have twisted inside him. He had been warned. Cory Vitiello had delivered his urgent caution. And now, there it was, undeniable, or at least impossible to ignore, a visual manifestation of the behavior the warning had hinted at. But what did it truly represent? Was it a casual moment, misinterpreted? A consensual private encounter taken out of context? Or, as the critics immediately proclaimed, evidence of what they called sugar baby behavior? Ask yourself, how often do we, as outsiders, rush to judgment based on fragments of reality? One picture, one snapshot, can carry meanings far beyond its original context. Yet for Meghan, the consequences were immediate. The photo challenged public perception, threatened private trust, and opened the door to speculation that could spiral uncontrollably. Social media users, news outlets, and online forums pounced, dissecting every detail, making assumptions, and amplifying the narrative. And as always, the most extreme interpretations gained the most traction. This is where contradictions emerge. On one hand, Meghan Markle is a public figure, a former duchess, a woman who understands how the world interprets images and actions. She knows the power of optics, the scrutiny applied to her every move. On the other hand, she is human, entitled to private moments, to intimacy and personal expression. But in a life lived under constant public surveillance, these human moments become fodder for judgment. And the photograph, in its stark immediacy, became the symbol of this tension, private behavior clashing with public expectation. Consider the emotional stakes. For Harry, the photograph wasn't just a potential scandal. It was evidence of the very behavior that Cory had warned him about. It was confirmation, or at least the appearance of confirmation, that private choices could have profound consequences. How do you reconcile love and loyalty with the need for truth? How do you act when the image itself seems to challenge everything you believe about trust, commitment, and shared values? These are not rhetorical questions. They were the reality facing Harry as he navigated the fallout of the photograph. Meanwhile, Meghan's response was complex and multi-layered. Anger at perceived intrusion, frustration at the judgment that immediately followed, and perhaps a deep-seated fear that private moments could now define her public identity. Here's the paradox. A life meticulously curated, a persona carefully constructed, now vulnerable to a single image. And yet, there is defiance too, a refusal to be constrained, to be dictated to by public opinion, or even by a warning delivered by a friend. This defiance, however, carries its own risk, a tension between self-expression and the consequences of exposure. Let's break down the context. The photograph allegedly originates from private interactions in California, in a social setting removed from the rigid scrutiny of the royal family. But the environment itself is critical. In California, surrounded by wealth, celebrity, and freedom, behavior can shift. Boundaries are looser. Expectations are different. Yet, paradoxically, the digital age ensures that nothing remains private. Cameras, smartphones, and social media turn intimate moments into potential headlines. And in Meghan's case, this photo became the catalyst for debate, scandal, and speculation. The public reaction, as expected, was instantaneous. Tabloid headlines flashed phrases like exposed, secret life, and sugar baby scandal. Online forums erupted with analysis, conjecture, and theories. Social media influencers dissected body language, clothing choices, and timing, constructing narratives that ranged from cautious speculation to outright condemnation. And as always, the most sensational stories garnered the most attention, creating a feedback loop that intensified scrutiny and amplified controversy. But here's the nuance. What critics labeled sugar baby behavior might not reflect reality at all. It is, in many ways, a projection of societal assumptions, a lens through which private behavior is interpreted according to preconceived notions of morality, status, and gender expectations. The image itself is a fragment, devoid of the context that defines intent, consent, and circumstance. And yet, once it circulates, context becomes almost irrelevant. The interpretation, not the reality, shapes public perception. This is where contradictions pile upon contradictions. Meghan, a woman advocating for privacy, autonomy, and empowerment, suddenly finds herself the target of judgment based on what some see as intimate behavior. Harry, caught between defending the woman he loves and grappling with the implications of the warning he received, faces a dilemma that is as personal as it is public. Cory Vitiello, who delivered the initial caution, now watches as his warning seems validated, yet also complicates relationships, trust, and alliances. And the world outside, hungry for scandal, willing to ignore nuance, and eager to witness what they interpret as a fall from grace. Emotional beats spike at every turn. Shock, disbelief, fear, and even guilt intertwine as the reality of exposure sinks in. One photograph has managed to do what many controversies fail to achieve. It created immediate, high-stakes tension, forcing decisions, reactions, and defenses from all involved. For Meghan, there's the pressure of defending herself against narrative and assumption. For Harry, the burden of interpreting warning, image, and loyalty. For Cory, the consequence of intervention and the unpredictable fallout that follows. Ask yourself, the viewer, if you were confronted with evidence of a loved one's private behavior circulating in the public sphere, how would you respond? Would you believe it, question it, or dismiss it as circumstantial? And if your friend had warned you in advance, does that change your perception? These questions are not abstract. They mirror the lived reality of the California showdown and the emergence of the photograph that allegedly proves the sugar baby allegation. And yet, even as the photograph circulated, even as speculation ran rampant, there were deeper questions lurking in the shadows. Who took the image? Why was it shared, even privately? Was it ever meant to become public, or was it a simple leak that spiraled uncontrollably? And what of the gentleman involved? How did he perceive this moment, and how did his actions ripple into the broader narrative? These unanswered questions added layers of mystery, tension, and suspense, ensuring that the drama was far from over. The narrative tension escalates further when we consider timing and motive. Why now? Why at this particular juncture? Was it coincidence, or was there an orchestrated effort by someone to expose private behavior at a critical moment? The answers are elusive, but the impact is undeniable. Public curiosity surged. Headlines multiplied. Private warnings and personal confrontations now intersected with the relentless scrutiny of the online world. Every glance, every reaction, every statement carried amplified significance. The photograph was not just a static image. It became a symbol, a touchstone for broader speculation about Meghan Markle's life, decisions, and character. It set in motion conversations that would span continents, influence allies and critics alike, and create consequences that no one could fully predict. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear. The sugar baby allegation was no longer just rumor. It was a narrative force, one that demanded attention, demanded response, and demanded answers. But just when it seemed the image had done its work, just when speculation reached fever pitch, a new revelation surfaced. One that connected California, Cory Vitiello's warning, and Meghan's private behavior in a way no one anticipated. This revelation would ignite the next chapter of the story, pulling all players deeper into a web of secrecy, emotion, and scandal that was far from over. What really happened in that private moment? That's the question that has circulated in whispers, online threads, and gossip columns for months. The so-called bra incident is the photograph that everyone is talking about, but the story behind it is far more layered, far more complex, and far more revealing than any image can convey. To understand its significance, we have to go back to the setting. A private gathering in California, a space removed from royal scrutiny, where boundaries, social norms, and public expectation are loosened, but not erased. Picture it. The evening was casual, intimate, yet charged with an undercurrent of attention. Meghan, surrounded by friends and acquaintances, was navigating a space that blurred personal freedom with the ever-present gaze of reputation. It was the kind of environment where people relax, jokes are shared, drinks are poured, and boundaries are negotiated, sometimes unconsciously. and it was in this environment that the moment allegedly captured in the photograph occurred. A moment intimate, private, and instantly sensational when leaked, shared, or even hinted at. The gentleman in the image has been widely speculated about. Some suggest he was simply a social acquaintance, someone who had crossed paths with Meghan professionally or personally. Others speculate on deeper ties, connections that blur friendship, flirtation, and intrigue. Whatever the case, the photograph captures a fleeting instant, one that, removed from context, becomes a symbol. A symbol that critics, observers, and online commentators have seized on to suggest behavior that contradicts the public persona of Meghan Markle. Ask yourself this: can one image truly define a person? Can a single private act, observed or photographed, capture the complexity of relationships, intentions, and context? For Meghan, the answer was simple: no. But for the world, the image told a story that was immediately compelling, immediately scandalous, and immediately viral. And therein lies the tension between private life and public scrutiny, a tension that has defined so much of her post-royal existence. The emotional weight of this incident cannot be overstated. For Meghan, there was the shock of exposure, the vulnerability of private behavior made public, and the fear that one misinterpreted action could overshadow years of carefully managed narrative. For Harry, there was the challenge of interpreting not just the image but the implications. The warning he had received from Cory Vitiello now intersected directly with a tangible, undeniable visual. How do you reconcile love, loyalty, and judgment in a moment like that? Layered over the emotional stakes is the media amplification. News outlets, social media platforms, and gossip websites dissected the photograph, speculating endlessly about intent, circumstance, and meaning. Memes circulated. Headlines screamed. Online commentators debated, often without nuance, often without consideration for context. And the public's fascination only intensified, creating a feedback loop in which curiosity, outrage, and judgment collided. The more extreme the narrative, the more attention it received, and Meghan found herself at the center of it all. Yet, as the photograph spread, contradictions emerged. Some witnesses claim it was a playful, innocuous moment, a joke, a flirtation, or a gesture without malice. Others argue it revealed something more, a pattern of behavior that aligned with concerns raised in Cory Vitiello's warning. And somewhere between these extremes lies the truth, obscured by speculation, interpretation, and the insatiable appetite of an audience eager for scandal. The tension between perception and reality is what makes this incident so compelling and so dangerous. Consider the psychological dynamics at play. Meghan, accustomed to controlling her image, suddenly faced an uncontrollable narrative. Harry, accustomed to shielding and managing crises, was confronted with evidence that demanded a response. Cory, having delivered the initial warning, now saw his caution validated but also complicated by the tangible reality of the photograph. And the gentleman involved? His role, whether innocent, complicit, or peripheral, added another layer of intrigue, ambiguity, and tension. Emotional spikes punctuate every aspect of this moment. Shock, embarrassment, defiance, and perhaps even amusement intermingle in a volatile mix. For Meghan, there is the humiliation of being interpreted, judged, and sensationalized. For Harry, there is the pressure of protecting, evaluating, and deciding how to act. For Cory, there is the weight of foresight, knowing that he had warned Harry and yet witnessing the escalation unfold in real time. And for the audience, there is the thrill of revelation, the curiosity of scandal, and the insatiable urge to speculate. The timing and setting amplify the drama. California, a place associated with freedom, celebrity, and privacy, ironically provides the perfect backdrop for exposure. Freed from the formal protocols of royalty, Meghan's actions are scrutinized more intensely precisely because they are removed from expectation. Public fascination thrives on contradiction, the polished duchess juxtaposed against intimate, casual, or playful private moments. And the bra incident encapsulates that contradiction perfectly. Audience engagement here is critical. Think about your own reaction. Would you interpret this as playful, scandalous, or neutral? How does context shift perception? And how do assumptions, cultural biases, and gendered expectations shape the narrative that emerges from such a photograph? These questions illustrate why the story resonates, not just as gossip, but as a lens into human judgment, media influence, and the fragility of reputation in the digital age. And as with all high-stakes incidents, there are ripples. The photograph did not exist in isolation. It intersected with prior warnings, rumors, and the ongoing California showdown. It shaped private conversations, influenced decisions, and fueled speculation that would travel far beyond the walls of any estate. Harry's response, Meghan's reaction, and the broader consequences became inextricably linked to a single moment frozen in time, a moment that would reverberate through subsequent chapters of this saga. Here's the irony. The photograph itself is a static image, but its effects are anything but static. It catalyzed discussions, prompted confrontations, and intensified scrutiny. It challenged assumptions, provoked debate, and forced those involved to confront questions they may have avoided. And even as speculation raged, one truth remained. The incident was not the end of the story. It was a pivotal, provocative spark, one that would ignite a series of events far more consequential than any single image could suggest. And just when it seemed that the incident had reached its peak, a new layer emerged. A context, a revelation, an insider account that reframed the photograph entirely, connecting it to patterns of behavior, private warnings, and the ongoing scrutiny of Meghan Markle's life in California. This revelation would propel the story into uncharted territory, blending scandal, insight, and high-stakes drama in a way that none of the participants could have anticipated. But what came next, after the photograph circulated and conversations intensified, would escalate the situation even further, forcing confrontations, reactions, and decisions that would leave all parties on edge and the public more intrigued than ever. When the photograph leaked, social media erupted. The moment Meghan Markle allegedly removed her bra in private with a gentleman wasn't just a private incident anymore. It became the centerpiece of global commentary, gossip, and outrage. Within hours, screenshots circulated across Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and countless private messaging threads. Hashtags trended, accounts debated, and memes surfaced, each one spinning the narrative in a more sensational direction than the last. The California sunset may have been calm, but online, a storm was brewing, relentless, merciless, and consuming everything in its path. Imagine the intensity of the moment from Meghan and Harry's perspective. The world was suddenly peering into a private instant. Every glance, every gesture, every tiny detail was analyzed, dissected, and judged. What was playful in a private setting became scandalous to a public audience. What was intimate became ammunition for critics. And in that amplification, the tiniest misstep could define a person's public narrative for months, even years. For Meghan, someone who had spent her life carefully curating her image, this was an unprecedented challenge. One photograph had undone countless carefully managed moments of public composure. The reactions online were swift, varied, and emotionally charged. Some expressed outrage, framing the photograph as confirmation of allegations hinted at in prior rumors. Others defended Meghan, arguing that the image lacked context and could easily be misinterpreted. And yet another group simply gawked, fascinated by the drama, consuming every snippet of information as though it were serialized entertainment. Social media had turned private life into public spectacle, and the California incident had become an uncontrollable story, one that escalated with each new post, comment, and share. Ask yourself, how would you react if something so personal about your life was plastered across global feeds? Would you respond, defend yourself, or wait for the storm to pass? And consider the stakes for Harry, his partner's privacy violated, a warning already given by Cory Vitiello now seemingly validated, and the need to navigate not just private emotions but public fallout. His challenge was twofold: manage Meghan's emotions while simultaneously considering how their public responses, or silence, might be interpreted and amplified. The emotional spikes of social media cannot be understated. Outrage, curiosity, speculation, and judgment collided in an endless cycle. Users questioned intentions, moral character, and even the very nature of Meghan's decisions. Some posts implied malice or promiscuity, others moral failure, and a few attempted nuance, though they were drowned out by the louder voices. And while the participants were human, Harry, Meghan, Cory, the audience's response was relentless, often lacking empathy, context, or understanding. Every glance, comment, and reaction contributed to a pressure cooker of scrutiny and judgment. In parallel, mainstream media seized the opportunity. Headlines screamed sensationally, framing the image as a scandalous revelation, often ignoring context, subtlety, or disclaimers. News cycles were dominated by speculation, quotes from anonymous sources, and dramatized interpretations. The photograph became more than a private moment. It became the headline, the story, the narrative everyone discussed, debated, and dissected. And as attention escalated, the pressure on Meghan and Harry intensified. But social media does something even more subtle and insidious than amplify scandal. It frames perception, shapes narrative, and dictates emotional response. Platforms thrive on engagement, clicks, and shares. Controversy is currency. Each post about Meghan and the bra incident gained traction precisely because people were invested emotionally. Outrage, fascination, curiosity, even humor. All of these elements ensured that the story remained at the top of feeds and minds. And the more sensational the interpretation, the more momentum it gained. Think about the contradictions that emerge here. Meghan, who advocates for privacy, autonomy, and personal freedom, suddenly finds her most private behavior scrutinized, judged, and broadcast. Harry, the protector and mediator, navigates the dual pressures of defending his partner while maintaining composure under unprecedented public gaze. Cory, the messenger, observes how his warning, once private, now resonates publicly, intensifying consequences he may never have fully anticipated. And the audience, detached but emotionally invested, fuels the cycle, often unconsciously shaping outcomes through commentary and speculation. Emotional beats escalate further when considering human behavior in online spaces. People interpret images and stories through their own biases, assumptions, and expectations. They project morality, judgment, and narrative onto fragments of reality. One photograph, one private moment, becomes a proxy for broader debates about character, lifestyle, and intention. And in this amplification, nuance is often lost. The story becomes a simple, consumable version of reality. The scandal, the betrayal, the outrage. Context, complexity, and personal emotion are secondary or entirely ignored. Audience engagement questions are critical here. If a private moment of yours were exposed, how would you respond? Would you confront the commentary, clarify context, or let it speak for itself? And if someone warned you in advance about potential exposure, would that alter your perception? These are not abstract questions. They mirror the exact dynamics faced by Meghan, Harry, and Cory in the aftermath of the California photograph. The social media storm also amplified existing tensions between private and public life. In California, Meghan and Harry had sought freedom, a space away from royal protocols. Yet freedom comes with its own vulnerabilities. Distance from formal scrutiny didn't mean freedom from judgment. It simply relocated it to a platform with global reach, instantaneous response, and relentless pressure. The private moment that sparked the photograph now intersected with this digital universe, creating a perfect storm of attention, interpretation, and controversy. As speculation intensified, the psychological impact deepened. Anxiety, defensiveness, frustration, and emotional exhaustion likely intensified in private spaces. Harry had to navigate not only the content of the warning and photograph, but also the emotional responses it provoked. Meghan had to contend with amplified public judgment and personal vulnerability. Cory had to consider how his intervention now played into an uncontainable narrative. And the world, watching, often lacked awareness of the emotional stakes hidden behind screens and headlines. The narrative tension rises further when we consider consequences beyond online attention. The photograph circulation, coupled with social media amplification, set in motion ripple effects touching relationships, reputation, and personal trust. Private conversations intensified. Decisions were reevaluated. Reactions had implications not just in California but across continents. As the royal family monitored, media outlets reported, and the public consumed every detail. The social media storm, initially a ripple, had now become a wave. reshaping context and raising stakes for all involved. And just when it seemed the narrative had peaked, another revelation emerged. Private messages, screenshots, and insider commentary began surfacing, connecting the photograph to earlier warnings from Cory Vitiello, private confrontations, and the ongoing drama of the California showdown. The story was no longer just a photograph. It was a network of interactions, a cascade of decisions, and a confrontation with consequences that could not be ignored. But as the storm reached its apex, a new chapter was about to unfold, a chapter in which the royal family's response, public perception, and private reckonings would collide in ways even Meghan, Harry, or Cory could not anticipate. And the outcome would challenge everything assumed about privacy, loyalty, and the consequences of exposure. When news of the photograph and the California confrontation reached the royal family, the reaction was swift, calculated, and layered with emotion. Behind the polished walls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor, whispers traveled through corridors, hallways, and private chambers. Advisors, aides, and courtiers weighed the implications, debated responses, and considered what impact this incident could have on not only the family's public image, but also the legacy of the monarchy itself. The photograph was more than a private moment. It was a flashpoint that rippled across continents, forcing the royals to confront a problem they could neither ignore nor entirely control. Picture Prince William receiving a briefing, his expression tense, brow furrowed, eyes scanning details that were both troubling and sensational. For him, the challenge was multifaceted. A younger brother entangled in personal turmoil, a sister-in-law whose behavior now sparked public debate, and a monarchy constantly scrutinized for every reaction, or lack thereof. Every decision carried weight. Every comment, every inaction, had potential consequences for the institution, the family's reputation, and the delicate balance of private loyalty versus public responsibility. The palace's immediate concern was not only the photograph itself, but also the narrative it created. Media outlets, already in frenzy mode, would interpret silence as complicity and missteps as endorsement or condemnation. Public relations strategies were drafted, revised, and debated around the clock. Every line of communication was scrutinized. Press releases, official statements, and even social media accounts were monitored, edited, and prepared to respond, or strategically remain silent. It was a chess game with stakes that extended far beyond California's borders. But the human element complicated everything. Behind the strategy and the optics were emotions, disappointment, frustration, and perhaps anger. The royals were confronted with contradictions between familial loyalty and public perception. Meghan, in private, may have been acting as any human would in a situation of personal freedom and vulnerability. Publicly, however, the stakes were magnified to a global scale. Harry, caught between defending his wife and acknowledging warnings from Cory Vitiello, had to navigate this emotional minefield with care, composure, and foresight. And for those inside the palace, witnessing this unfold in real time, the tension was palpable. One insider described the atmosphere as a mix of disbelief and urgency. Discussions were not hypothetical. They were tactical, emotionally charged, and laden with implications. How would the monarchy respond if the story escalated further? Could the public differentiate between private behavior and public responsibility? What message would silence convey? What message would a response convey? These questions fueled endless conversations, shaping every action taken in the days following the photograph's circulation. And then came the human contradictions, the very things that make this story resonate. The royal family is steeped in tradition, protocol, and expectation. Public decorum is paramount. Yet, here was a situation that defied easy categorization. Private behavior intersecting with public scrutiny, warnings delivered in California now validated by visual evidence, and social media amplifying every reaction beyond control. The royals, accustomed to controlling narrative through official channels, faced a reality in which control was slipping, a narrative driven by the immediacy of viral content rather than deliberate communication. Imagine the conversations behind closed doors. "We need to respond carefully," one aide might have said. Any reaction can be interpreted as criticism or support. Timing, wording, and tone are everything. Another might have countered, "But we cannot ignore this entirely. The public will notice silence, and speculation will only grow. We need a measured acknowledgement." Each perspective was informed by protocol, by personal loyalty, and by the need to manage the family's image while navigating the complexities of human emotion. Harry, meanwhile, faced his own internal conflict. Cory Vitiello's warning had prepared him for the possibility that private behavior could complicate the narrative. The photograph, however, provided undeniable evidence, forcing a confrontation not only with the external media storm, but also with his own emotional processing. Loyalty, love, and the instinct to protect collided with the realization that private matters, once revealed, could carry immense public consequences. And in this moment, the royal family's reactions were not just strategic. They were personal, affecting relationships, trust, and the very sense of stability within the family. The contradictions extended further. Meghan, seeking freedom and autonomy in California, found herself subjected to the very scrutiny she had tried to escape. Harry, navigating loyalty and protection, discovered the limitations of even the closest relationships when private warnings intersected with viral exposure. Cory, the messenger, realized the far-reaching impact of his intervention as private guidance now fueled public speculation. And the royal family, accustomed to centuries of protocol, discovered that controlling perception in the digital age required unprecedented agility, foresight, and emotional intelligence. The media, of course, intensified the pressure. Headlines speculated not only on Meghan's actions, but also on the royal family's response, or perceived lack thereof. Analysts debated whether silence indicated approval, condemnation, or strategic ambiguity. Public opinion surged, shifting with each new detail, each new rumor, and each insider comment. The photograph, once a private incident, had become a catalyst for global discussion, challenging assumptions about privacy, behavior, and the reach of fame. Emotional stakes continued to spike. Frustration, anxiety, and urgency permeated the palace, with every conversation tinged by the knowledge that perception mattered as much as reality. Discussions about strategy intertwined with genuine concern for family dynamics. How could the royals address the incident without exacerbating tension? How could they balance duty, loyalty, and empathy? And how would Harry and Meghan respond in a way that protected not only their private relationship, but also the family's broader reputation? Consider the implications of timing. The California incident occurred in a moment of relative calm, away from the public eye, removed from daily royal duties. Yet its impact was instantaneous. The photograph, Cory's warning, and the shouting in California collided to create a perfect storm, one in which the royal family had to react quickly, strategically, and emotionally. Decisions made in these moments were critical, shaping public perception, familial dynamics, and future interactions between Meghan, Harry, and the palace. And then there's the subtlety of influence. Advisors and insiders within the royal family likely weighed not just the immediate impact of the photograph, but also the long-term implications. How would it affect public trust? How would it influence ongoing relationships? How might it shape perceptions of Meghan and Harry in the context of their exit from royal duties? Each consideration added layers of complexity, tension, and emotional weight, making the response far more than a simple PR decision. It became a delicate balancing act of human emotion, loyalty, and public expectation. By now, the audience must wonder, how did the royals proceed? How did they reconcile personal relationships with public scrutiny, love with loyalty, and private emotion with strategic necessity? And what conversations, decisions, and reactions emerged in the aftermath that would shape not only California, but also the perception of Meghan Markle globally? The answers lie in the subsequent actions, in the private dialogues, and in the unfolding consequences that would continue to escalate tension, drama, and intrigue. But just when it seemed that the royal family's reactions might stabilize the situation, another layer surfaced, a cascade of insider accounts, personal revelations, and leaks that connected the California incident, the photograph, and Cory Vitiello's warning in ways no one had predicted. The story was far from contained, and the next chapter would plunge deeper into secrets, confrontation, and emotional reckoning that would leave everyone involved reeling. Screenshots, private messages, whispered accounts from friends and associates. The California incident, already explosive on its own, suddenly gained layers of complexity as insider information began to emerge. What was once a photograph in isolation now became part of a tangled web of messages, emails, and private communications that painted a far more intricate picture of Meghan Markle's private life and the warning Cory Vitiello had delivered to Prince Harry. The leaks didn't just add details. They reshaped the narrative, raising questions, sparking speculation, and amplifying tension in ways no one could have anticipated. Imagine Harry's perspective. He had already absorbed the shock of the warning and the photograph, balancing loyalty, love, and concern in a delicate, almost impossible equilibrium. And now, he was confronted with a cascade of new information, screenshots of private texts, messages that hinted at motives, conversations that revealed intentions, and accounts that contradicted previous assumptions. Every new piece of information carried emotional weight, demanding interpretation, judgment, and immediate consideration. It was like walking through a minefield with every step triggering a new layer of complication. The first leaks reportedly involved text messages exchanged between Meghan and various acquaintances, messages that seemed innocuous on their own, but became charged when viewed in context with the photograph and the warning. One message hinted at playful interaction, another suggested tension over boundaries, a third implied awareness of scrutiny and exposure. Each fragment added nuance, contradiction, and ambiguity to a story already thick with speculation. And for Harry, these messages were both confirmation and complication, a blend of validation for the warning he had received, and yet a puzzle demanding careful navigation. Ask yourself, how would you process such a torrent of private information? Messages that could be interpreted in multiple ways, leaks that may have been manipulated or taken out of context, and insights into intentions that are often impossible to fully understand. For Harry, the challenge was not simply interpreting the content, but assessing the reliability, context, and potential fallout of each communication. Every choice carried implications for his relationship, for public perception, and for the broader narrative surrounding Meghan. Meanwhile, Meghan herself had to contend with the ramifications of these leaks. Messages that had been private, intended for a friend, a colleague, or even the gentleman in the photograph, were now circulating, dissected, and judged by an audience with no insight into intent. The vulnerability of exposure was immediate and visceral. Trust, boundaries, and personal agency were suddenly front and center, forcing Meghan to navigate not only her own emotions, but also the public interpretation of her words and actions. Cory Vitiello's role intensified in this context. The warning he had delivered privately to Harry was now intersecting with evidence of private communications and leaks that reinforced the urgency of his caution. Yet his intervention, once discreet, now became part of the broader story. Observers began questioning his motives, his timing, and his relationship to both Harry and Meghan. Was he simply a messenger? Or had he inadvertently become a key figure in a drama that was expanding far beyond the original confrontation? The psychological dynamics were staggering. Leaks and messages created layers of ambiguity, forcing everyone involved to question not only actions, but intentions. One text could be read as playful or provocative. Another might appear defensive or accusatory. And as each new fragment surfaced, the emotional stakes escalated. Frustration, fear, defensiveness, and even anger became constant companions. For Harry and Meghan, the combination of private warning, photograph, and insider communications became a storm that tested patience, judgment, and trust in ways few outside could comprehend. The public, of course, fed the fire. Screenshots and messages quickly found their way on his social media, blogs, and forums. Analysis ranged from careful interpretation to sensationalist speculation. Every word, punctuation mark, and emoji became fodder for debate. Context was scarce, nuance rare, and assumptions rampant. And yet, the leaks compelled attention, driving engagement and intensifying the scrutiny on Meghan and Harry's personal and private interactions. The digital age had turned what could have remained a private dispute into a public spectacle, where interpretation often outweighed reality. Ask the audience, how would you feel if private messages meant only for a trusted friend became a matter of global discussion? Could you maintain composure, or would the emotional toll become overwhelming? And what if those messages were coupled with a photograph and prior warnings? The intersection of private communication, leaked content, and public interpretation creates a pressure cooker of anxiety, trust issues, and judgment that few can navigate without significant emotional cost. Yet, amid the chaos, contradictions persisted. Some leaks painted Meghan as playful, aware, and even cautious. Others portrayed tension, defensiveness, and secrecy. The inconsistency between messages, combined with public speculation, created a narrative that was fluid, unpredictable, and impossible to control. Each new leak added momentum, pushing the story further into public consciousness while simultaneously complicating the relationships at the heart of the drama. The sequence of leaks also revealed broader patterns. Observers began connecting dots, conversations that aligned with the warning Cory delivered, messages that hinted at private intentions, and photographs that seemed to confirm suspicions. The interplay between private communication and public exposure created a feedback loop, where one revelation prompted interpretation, which in turn prompted further leaks and discussion. The story, once confined to California, now reverberated globally, touching family, media, and the public imagination. And then there were the direct consequences. Private messages not only shaped perception, they influenced behavior. Decisions about confronting, clarifying, or concealing became urgent, weighted with the knowledge that the next leak could escalate consequences exponentially. Trust was fragile, loyalty was tested, and the emotional toll on Harry and Meghan grew heavier with every new fragment that emerged, every insider account that circulated, every speculation that went viral. By the end of this cascade, it became clear that the leaks and text messages were more than mere details. They were catalysts. They forced confrontation, shaped narrative, and intensified